Cronyism, the appointment of friends and associates to positions of authority without proper regard to their qualifications. Nepotism, the practice among those with power or influence of favoring relatives or friends. Let's explore the Nye County definition of both. By now, you already know Rick Marshall, arrested in 1986 for allegations of sexual misconduct while on duty as a deputy sheriff in Ventura, California. He was arrested by and terminated from his agency and moved to Nye County. He was ultimately promoted to assistant sheriff, where he's currently serving. He has a current investigation pending against him for sexual harassment of numerous Nye County employees. Robert Bob Balding also worked as a police officer in Ventura, California. In 1986, Balding was brought up on allegations of police brutality and taken to jury trial. By 1987, Balding was also under investigation for inappropriate acts with prostitutes and for tampering with evidence at a homicide scene, the culmination of which led to his termination. He came to Nye County through his friendship with Marshall. During his time with the NCSO, Balding was engaging in inappropriate sexual relations with a teenage NCSO cadet. In 2002, Balding donated $1,000 to Rick Marshall's failed campaign for sheriff. In 2010, Balding took an early buyout from Nye County, taking thousands of taxpayer dollars. He retired, waiving rights to any future employment in Nye County. Shortly after his retirement, Rick Marshall convinced Nye County to rehire Balding, despite the objections of the Human Resources Department. His retirement buyout was never paid back. Antonio Mark Medina, you met previously as being the on and off duty friend of Rick Marshall, who posts and shares sexist and racist Facebook posts. In the early 90s, Medina worked near Ventura, California as a police officer and also left that employment after allegations of sexual assault while on duty surfaced about him. Medina came to Nye County and was hired and ultimately promoted by Rick Marshall. Ironically, Marshall placed Medina in charge of internal affairs investigations, despite having numerous disciplinary actions, including disciplinary actions for sexual harassment-related violations. Despite this, Rick Marshall recently promoted Medina to lieutenant of the Nye County Detention Center, even though he was far less qualified than numerous other candidates for the position. And once more, Medina has a current investigation pending against him for sexual harassment of numerous Nye County employees. Sergeant Michael Horn, the son-in-law of Rick Marshall, was fired from Henderson Police Department during his probationary period because of allegations of sexual misconduct. Horn was hired in Nye County and promoted by Rick Marshall to sergeant. Over the years, several allegations against Horn were brought forward to the NCSO administration but were swept under the carpet. Horn was ultimately arrested for a slew of charges, including narcotics use, robbery, and violating the public trust. Sheriff DeMeo and Rick Marshall did not release the declaration of arrest immediately, as is customary, and as was done just weeks prior when another NCSO deputy was arrested. Horn was quickly released from jail, with details of his arrest kept from media in an apparent attempt to protect Rick Marshall's campaign for sheriff. Rick Marshall is in charge of the Internal Affairs Division, which is investigating Horn. When concerned Nye County deputies released details to the media that were being kept secret, Nye County administration and the Internal Affairs Division under Rick Marshall threatened those deputies with termination. Joseph Joey Marshall, son of Rick Marshall, was hired prior to becoming 21 years of age, which is legal but very uncommon. He currently works under the supervision of his father, Rick Marshall, in violation of Nye County policy. During his short time of employment, co-workers feel that Joey has been afforded more training and special assignment opportunities than non-related co-workers, and in spite of less than impressive performance. Rick has clearly favored and appointed his friends, relatives, and associates to positions of authority without proper regard for their qualifications. Nepotism, cronyism. And if that wasn't enough, let us keep looking. In 1999, Nye County Sheriff Wade Liskey was suspected for misconduct in the Ted Binion slaying investigation. Sergeant Ed Howard and Detective Sergeant Steve Huggins testified in that investigation about suspicions they had of Wade Liskey's behavior. Shortly after this testimony, Assistant Sheriff Rick Marshall reassigned Howard from patrol sergeant to animal control. Allegations were made that the reassignment was in retaliation for Sergeant Howard's testimony against Liskey. Ultimately, Howard prevailed in the investigation against him. Marshall also attempted to reassign Detective Sergeant Huggins to the position of front office clerk. Former DA Robert Beckett was arrested in 2008 for DUI after wrecking 2 different vehicles, one being a county-owned vehicle. In 2010, Beckett was also arrested for dozens of felonies pertaining to the illegal administration of the Nye County Bad Check Division. A lawsuit alleged that Dr. Topo provided a medical defense for Beckett during his DUI case. Now, about Dr. Frank Topo. Dr. Topo was a local physician in Pahrump. It's reported that he was a physician to Rick Marshall, Michael Horn, and Robert Beckett. In 2006, Topo's sons were accused by Manuel Manny Mayers, a former Nye County deputy sheriff, of inappropriate sexual conduct against his daughter. Mayers alleged that Topo provided a defense for Beckett in exchange for Beckett's discrediting Mayers. Topo denied doing so through his attorney Tom Gibson. In 2008, Beckett filed charges against Mayers on information from Rick Marshall. Those charges were dropped. Coincidentally, in 2008, Topo donated $1,000 to Bob Beckett's campaign for Nye County District Judge. In 2011, Nye County paid Mayers $250,000, with Topo responsible to Mayers for $25,000 in a malicious prosecution suit. In 2014, when Horn was arrested, Dr. Topo reportedly aided in his quick OR release in violation of the statutory 12-hour minimum waiting period. James Marshall, Rick Marshall's brother, was recently arrested for possession of child pornography. During his arrest, it was reported that James and his wife called Rick Marshall, who gave advice that interfered with the investigating deputies on scene. Additionally, it's reported that Rick Marshall contacted attorney Tom Gibson, who got involved on James Marshall's behalf. Tom Gibson also represented Dr. Topo in relation to the allegations lodged by Mayers, which also included Rick Marshall. 10 different people, 10 very intertwined set of circumstances. Numerous allegations of sexual misconduct, retaliation, and corruption, all centered around one person, Rick Marshall. Almost 30 years of serious conspiracies, crimes, civil violations, and corruptions all center around one man. And that man wants to be your next sheriff. Say no to nepotism. Say no to any more cronyism. Say no to any more corruption. Say no to any more Rick Marshall. Time for integrity. Time for ethics. Time for change. Vote anybody but Rick Marshall for Nye County Sheriff.